your expertise lies, it's good to think about how your specific skill set might fit into a UX team. Okay, so before we dive into Figma, I just want to give a kind of a brief overview on why we're teaching Figma today, or why I decided to use Figma, and the kind of the process that goes into choosing a design tool for whatever prototype or experience that you're trying to build. There are a lot of opinions online about what is the best design tool or what tools any UX designer needs to know in order to succeed in the industry. A lot of it is kind of just personal preference though. I have actually never worked in Sketch, and for a long time everyone said you had to know Sketch in order to be a UX designer. A lot of companies now are moving towards Figma, but I have seen people using Vision or Adobe XD. A lot of the tools can do very similar things, and it really comes down to the specific situation that you're prototyping for. So if you're thinking about whatever you might be building today or in the future, you really want to think about the fidelity of what you're trying to build. So are you going to be testing a lot of super low fidelity designs, or are you kind of more at the medium or high fidelity stage where you want a potential user to actually think that this is what the prototype is going to feel like when they actually were to use this experience? Or are you even farther along than that and you're going to be like handing off these designs to developers? That's all going to play into the decision of what design tool you're going to use. And then also that there's the question of like team and comfort level and who all is going to be collaborating on this project. So for Figma, I think it's really great for that medium to high fidelity step. So if you're doing super low fidelity stuff, like you're just in the early generation stage, something like Whimsical or a few other products that are out there might actually be better to just kind of quickly get your ideas onto a page or a screen and test a lot of different flows. But once you started to sort of align on a flow that you want to test the look and feel of with users, that's where Figma becomes really key. And it's also kind of the go-to tool at this point for handing things off to a development team because it has some of its own built-in development tools and it's super high fidelity and it does its own redlining, so designers don't have to do that. It's also great because, as I'm sure some of you have already started to experiment with, you can have multiple teammates that can view and contribute and comment and test the same prototype. So just wanted to kind of give you that background on sort of where Figma sits in the design tool world. Today, I'm going to give you a very quick overview of how to use Figma. And to do that, I'm going to kind of walk us through the steps of prototyping a super simple experience. So we're going to set up some frames, add some pre-built UI components to those frames, and then add transitions between those frames to kind of create this clickable prototype experience. At the end, if we have time, I'm also going to talk to you guys a little bit about a concept called Figma components, which can kind of take your prototypes to the next level and allow you to prototype faster and with more consistency over time. But with that, I think we're going to dive right into the Figma file. So one more time, I'm going to go ahead and post the link in the chat just in case anyone hasn't seen it yet. So in the Zoom chat, there's a link to the Figma file that I am going to be working in today. And if you go to that file and you click on the arrow and say duplicate to your drafts, I can actually show, oh wow, there's a lot of you in here. So all of you who are in this file, you came to the right place, but you're going to want to click this arrow right here and say duplicate. Yours is going to say duplicate to my drafts. So you're going to make your own copy and you're actually going to be working in your own personal copy so you can kind of do whatever you want there. That way we don't have chaos in my one Figma file that I'm going to be working in. If you guys have any trouble with that, just go ahead and post in the chat. I know there's a lot of us, so we may or may not be able to answer every single question that comes up. The big thing I want to stress though before I dive in is that one, this session is being recorded, so hopefully you guys can always come back to this recording and if you have anything that you want to hear again or any other questions, you can kind of come back and build things from there. The other thing is that this process that we're going to be walking through is kind of step by step going to be laid out in each of these pages. So the document that you are duplicating has like our final product that we're finishing with today in the second to last page. So if as you're going along, you miss something or you decide like, I want to just watch and I don't want to build right now, that's totally fine. You can still follow along with these pages in the left now. I'm going to check the chat really quick, make sure. Oh, information about where we can access the recording. I think Sam has that information, which he can share maybe at the end. It looks like posted on our YouTube at HackDuke. So that's where you'll be able to access it later. Okay, so we're all hopefully in our Figma files, respectively. So let me just give you a quick tour of everything that we're looking at in Figma. So the left-hand side of our Figma screen is kind of how we organize our files. So the layers page is really where you're going to want to be. Assets is something that we won't get into today. It's really helpful when you're working on big projects with a lot of different collaborators and a lot of different files. But for today, we're working in one file, and our files are organized by pages. So each page is a completely separate experience, and you can kind of click through the pages and see, you could have totally different pages of a website on each of these pages. It's just a way to kind of organize your file. Within each of these pages, you have frames. And so each of the screens that I have laid out right now, these are all frames, and they're going to show up underneath your pages in your Figma file. Frames are basically the building blocks of anything in Figma that is going to be prototypable. So in order for something to show up in your prototype, it has to be contained within a frame. The frame tool is the one right next to the selection tool. So just to the right, if you click the frame tool, you'll see that Figma has a bunch of built-in frames that out of the box are the right sizes for a lot of experiences you're going to want to prototype. So you have like your iPhone 8, which is probably the one that I use the most for mobile experiences. But there's also like tablet options if you're doing something maybe in healthcare that might be helpful, and also kind of like your classic desktop as well. I'm just going to keep an eye on the chat and make sure. Okay. Okay, cool. Sorry, just making sure we're all still good. Okay. So frames are kind of the building block. Onto your frames or into your frames, you can put any number of Figma elements. So next to the frame tool is our shape tool. So you kind of have a set of built-in shapes that will get a lot of the job done for stuff that you're going to prototype. So if you want to go ahead and choose the rectangle tool, which you can also choose by clicking R, and then onto a frame, click and drag and release, you can create your first rectangle. But when we have this rectangle selected, we can start to see where the design tools come into place. So this kind of gives us a lot of stuff that's very similar to like Adobe Illustrator or other design tools, even like Google Slides. You can align left, center, top, bottom, so any type of alignment. If we actually create two squares, so if we copy and paste a second rectangle, and then we drag and select both of them, we can distribute their vertical spacing and distribute their, oh wait, hold on. We had them overlapping and select them. You can see where we distribute their, oh, it's not working. Okay, never mind, ignore that. We'll just keep moving down here. You can also mess with the fill, so changing what color the rectangle is. You can add a stroke of a different color. Maybe make that 10 and on the outside. So there's kind of just these simple, like out of the box UI elements that you can add very easily to your frames. The next, and probably the only other piece that we're going to use today is the text tool. So text tool is very similar. You can drag and drop and create a text element. And then inside that text element, you can type whatever you want. You can highlight it. And again, you can style your text using font size, bold, regular, depending on what fonts you have on your computer. One thing that we're going to use today and that I pre-created for us are a set of text styles. So if you want to kind of create a consistent experience, a really good thing to do is kind of initially decide what are your maybe like your header 1s and your header 2s going to look like. And I'm going to be super simple today. So just like a 36-point font that is regular is our header 1. So if you go into text styles, you should be able to switch between header 1 and header 2. And then say we also want to set this alignment as centered. That's something else we can do. You can mess with these text styles if you want to edit them. And then anything that's header 1 will get updated. And you can also create new text styles. So I just kind of wanted to give you guys a couple to start from, and then as you're going about creating files, you know how you can update those and add new ones. Okay, so that's just kind of quick basic overview. There's a few other tools up here that we're not going to use today, but this commenting tool might be really helpful for you if you're working in a team today. Basically allows you to click and leave a comment anywhere on the page, and you can click a frame, you can click an element, just write like, we need more here. And then the comment's gonna show up in the right nav as well. So you can tag other people in your team in the comments as well. So that can be a good way to kind of give people real-time feedback if you're working kind of asynchronously, or if you have like a mentor or someone that you want to show a design to and get their feedback on, this is a really good option for them to use to give you feedback. Okay, so we're going to move into the next page and kind of into our mini little project for today. So for today, I thought it'd be really great for us to prototype a very simple experience in this made-up workout tracker app, where essentially a user can like open the app, decide they want to do a workout, input 3 preferences, start their workout, finish their workout, and then view their stats. You're going to develop your own process for prototyping experiences as you do that and as you maybe like explore or journey with becoming a designer. But something that's really helpful for me when I'm prototyping anything is to list out the discrete steps like this. Because when you start to list out those steps, you start to understand how many frames you're going to need in your prototype. So in this case, I think we need probably 5, maybe 6 frames. So we're going to go ahead and create those. So again, if we go to our frame tool, we're going to use, this is going to be a mobile app experience. So we use the iPhone 8, and we have created our first frame by clicking on that. Really good practice to get in the habit of is naming our frames right away, because that's how we're going to identify them over here in this left nav. So we'll say opens app. And from this first frame, you can command or control copy and paste, create a second frame. In this case, we'll call it workout preferences. And then we're going to copy and paste and add 3 more. This is a really great example. We're just going to move on to the next page where we have the 5 frames sort of ready to go for us. So again, throughout this experience, if you're falling behind or you're feeling like you don't want to follow along right now, all of these pages, the next page is going to kind of show us the next step. So you can always click to that next page. Okay, so this is where things start to get fun. So we're going to start to add UI components to our frames. And I've provided us with a few like very simple, not pretty UI components for us to add. The reason that I built these for us in advance instead of building them today is because there are a ton of existing Figma component libraries that are out there where designers who spend their whole days thinking about buttons and nav bars, etc., like they have built UI components that you can use for free in Figma to build out these experiences. I have a link at the end of our presentation to a material UI design kit, but just kind of in general, if you are new to UX, a really good thing to do is to look for a kit that you feel comfortable using, because you don't necessarily want to spend all of your time designing like the perfect button when that's like probably not the most interesting thing about your experience. Usually like the most interesting thing about a UX experience is the way that you combine different elements together into a full prototype or into a full experience. So with that in mind, we're gonna go ahead and use some of these elements and add them to our frames. So I listed beneath each frame kind of what needs to go on that frame. So you can start to copy and paste those in, and I'll show you some of the alignment tools with that. So the first frame, we're gonna copy over our nav bar, and we'll click our frame by clicking on the title of the frame and paste it. And then we can use our alignment tool to go ahead and align that to the bottom of the frame. Similarly, we'll click on our app header, copy that, click on our open app frame and paste it, and then we'll align that to the top of the frame. And then the other thing I wanted to include on this page, this is kind of their landing on the app, is our welcome message. So in this case, we're going to create our own text box, and we're going to do the same thing we did before where we drag and drop to create our text area. We're going to use our header 1 text style in the right. We'll click that and we'll say welcome to kind of create our welcome message. And then the next thing we're going to create is a call to action. So are you ready to work out? And in this case, we're going to give it the header 2 text style. So add our message, you can add whatever you want. And then a button so that a user can actually click on that button and go to their workout. So we'll copy the button and paste it here. And we'll say some sort of positive CTA. So this looks pretty good. There are a couple small things that we'll want to do before I move on. So one, it might be nice to kind of align these 3 elements vertically on the page. So to do that, we can select the 3 elements in our left nav here. So we have the button, we can hold shift, and then we can click the other 2 elements. So we have these 3 elements selected. And we're actually going to group them because as a group, we want them to be aligned vertically. So if we hit Control on the group in the left nav, we'll open up this huge nav. And what we're going to choose is group selections. You can also use a Command G or a Control G to do that. And once the selection is grouped, then we can vertically center it. And so now we have that whole group vertically centered within our app. The last thing we're going to do that I want to show you before we move to connecting our prototype is if this was a scrollable experience, so if this actually had more to it, we would want this navigation bar and this header to actually stay sticky on our screen. And Figma has a really easy way to do that. So if you select one or both of those elements and click this Fix Position When Scrolling button, once we start to create our prototype, these elements are going to stay fixed while anything in here is going to scroll. And you can see in the left nav, you can verify that because it'll say fixed and it'll say scrolls. Okay, so we're running out of time fast. This is going very quickly. So we're going to go ahead and pretend that we kind of copy and pasted over the rest of our components and move into how we actually connect them. Because this is probably the most important piece for creating a prototype that really feels real. So in our right panel, we've been using these design elements. So when we select a frame, we see all these options for how we can design. Right next to the design header is the prototype header. So this is how we actually start to build something that will be clickable for someone to test. So once we have the prototype panel selected, you'll see that every element on the page has this blue little dot next to it. And so for our first example, we want this button to take them to the input preferences page. So we're going to drag from that blue dot to the input preferences page. And then once we do that, a bunch of options are going to come up for how we want that interaction to go. So in this case, we're saying when this button is clicked, we're going to navigate to the input preferences frame. And it also gives us a bunch of options for how we want that animation to happen. So it could be an instant animation where it's literally just going to click and go. Or I think in this case, we'll do a slide in. So you can kind of preview it over here. B is going to slide in over A. So that's great. We've got this connection set up. To actually see what this is going to look like and what we can show a potential user, you're going to click this present button. And so the present button is going to open up this separate screen where you can start to see your prototype. So we've added this connection. Now we've got this hover. We click let's go, and we're taken to our next screen. So now we know we can verify that that is working. So we're going to add a few more of those connections. We're going to skip the drop down for now, but first we're going to add another connection from this button. So same thing, we're going to click the blue circle and drag it to the workout started frame. And in this case, I kind of wanted to make one that felt like it was sort of sliding to take over the whole screen. So I'm doing a slide in from the bottom. So if we click back to our prototype, we can see that's what that's going to look like. If you're ever, so between workout started and workout ended, what we're kind of prototyping here is like the passage of time. It's not necessarily a user clicking a button. A trick I usually use when I'm prototyping an experience like that is I select the entire frame, so the entire workout started frame, and I add a connection between anywhere on that frame to the next frame. And then I make the animation a dissolve. So just like when a user gets to this screen, they don't necessarily know where to click if they were testing it, but they just click and see, oh, okay, I finished the workout. This is what I'm seeing now. And then our last connection is going to be they go to see the stats from their workout. So we can, again, click and drag and move in that last frame to see their workout stats. So we've got a pretty nifty prototype so far. We have got a few different connections, so it feels like someone's actually moving through our app. But I wanted to show you guys one more thing in terms of prototyping connections, which is a somewhat newer feature in Figma called overlays. So right now we've been prototyping, and every time when we click something, we're navigating to a new frame. However, in the case of a drop-down like this one, we don't necessarily want to navigate to a new frame. What we really want to do is show the drop-down open when someone clicks this button. So Figma up to about 2 years ago didn't really have this capability, or maybe even just a year ago. But now they have it through something called overlays. So in this case, we can still use our prototype tool. We're going to drag from this circle to our open drop-down menu. And it's still going to be an on-click interaction, but instead of a navigate to, we're going to open an overlay. And so opening an overlay can kind of be something that like takes up the whole screen. So in the out-of-the-box versions that Figma gives, it might be like a pop-up, so you'd want it like centered on the screen, or it might be something that's coming like a nav bar or a nav menu that's opening from the top left or from the bottom left. But in this case, we're actually going to do a manual overlay. So when you choose manual, this kind of like ghost UI element is going to show up. And this is showing you where the overlay is going to open once you click that component. So now, if we go back to the beginning of our prototype, and we go and click our dropdown, you can see that the overlay opens. So that's really nifty because we didn't have to duplicate our entire frame to see this drop-down opening. However, in order to actually show the user picking a different option, so right now they have Pilates selected, but let's say that we want to have them choose strength training. We are going to need another frame where strength training is their selected option. So in order to do that, we're going to move our current frames over. So you can either drag and select the whole frame, or you can select each of them and hold shift. We're going to drag these over. And then we are going to create a copy of the input preferences frame. So we're going to command or control copy and paste. And in this case, we're going to have not Pilates selected, but the strength training selected. So we're going to go back to our design panel. We're going to double click and we're going to type in strength training. And then when we go to our overlay component, we can double click into the strength training button, open the prototype tool, and then drag from that button to this frame. And so in this case, we are going to navigate to this new frame where strength training is selected, but instead of doing a slide in animation, we're going to make this one instantaneous. So it really feels like the user is going to stay on the same page, but that they've just selected a new option for strength training. So if we go back, we go to this first page, we still have the option to just click this button and start our workout, or we can go open the overlay, choose strength training, and then start our workout. So you can start to see where if you added a few different overlays to your components and a few different paths, it can be easier to kind of create a more realistic prototype experience rather than kind of forcing users down this very specific path that you might be wanting to test. Okay, so I know that that is a lot, and I want to leave some time at the end of this to kind of allow, I know that each of you are probably at a different phase in learning how to prototype in Figma. My goal is just kind of give you like a brief overview so you know what's going on, but you're going to learn the most just kind of doing this and asking questions and making mistakes. If you haven't been able to follow along, the final product of what I've just shown you is in this page called Final Product. So you can see the connections that I've made, and you can see and click on and experiment with all of the components that I've made as well. The one last thing that I wanted to kind of give you guys a little bit of a preview of, if you're maybe a little bit farther along in learning Figma, is there is this concept called Figma components. So Figma components are kind of similar to components that you would build in code, in that they're kind of repeatable instances of the same thing. And you can always copy and paste like things that you've made. So this nav bar that we made and copy and paste it across our frames earlier, you can always do that. However, if we then decide to update our nav bar, we're gonna have to go and re-copy and paste every instance of our nav bar because all those copies are not gonna have the updates. What Figma components do is kind of give you the opportunity to create these universal components so that when you update one component, so say I have this nav bar, I update the color to blue, I have a bunch of instances of this nav bar and they all get updated as well. Similarly, if I have a button and I want to change the styling or change the color, say I'm going to make these much rounder, then all of the instances of that component get updated as well. And the reason I am kind of introducing you to this is not because I necessarily think that you'll want to create or spend a lot of time like really thinking about components today, but as you potentially start to use Figma more, setting things up as components can be really great ways to take your design from a low fidelity, no color, very simple design and then actually adding that color in at the component level and seeing it impact your entire application. So really, really quickly, I'm going to show you how to make a component, and then I'll leave time for any questions or anyone who wants to stay on and ask questions. So I'm first going to undo this component. So I'm going to, actually, I'm just going to make a copy. And I'm going to, so it's just our normal button component here. And we're going to say, I'm going to make it this color. In order to create a component, I select whatever element I want to be that repeatable thing throughout my prototype. I hit Control either on the button itself or over here on the left. And then there's this create component option. And so now we're going to call this button 2, say. And if I make a copy of button 2 and I paste it, you'll see that this is not, this doesn't have quite the same treatment. So that's how we know it's a instance of a component and not the master component. But if we update the master, so say we change the color to something totally different, that instance of the component is going to get changed as well. So you can start to see how this would be really powerful and helpful as you're kind of building a lot of different screens that are all using the same elements, which is why I wanted to introduce it to you. There's a ton of more videos on components, and so I included an intro video in my last slide, which I'm going to pull up here, and I'll share this with Sam as well, so he can potentially share it out with everyone who attended today afterwards. But that is pretty much it. I know that was a very quick run through, but I'm just going to kind of leave this slide up, and then also give anyone a chance to ask any questions. I'm going to check the chat really quick just to make sure. How do you navigate? Ooh, that's a great. How do you navigate side to side without using the bottom scroll bar? Great. Okay, I will show you. I'm going to escape and go to Figma. Ooh, that's my work Figma. Okay. So if you want to navigate side to side without a scroll bar, you can click space, hold the space bar, and then you get this drag and drop experience. The other option you have for that is to click this little hand tool. And once that's selected, you can also drag and drop. So you can either use the space bar or you can click the hand tool in order to navigate from side to side. All right, we'll keep looking at questions. Let's see, how may we resize pictures? Let's see, so if you want to resize an image, let's get an image in here. Let's see, Duke logo. So if we wanted to bring an image into our Figma file, save image as Duke. We're going to drag and drop it from our downloads. And then to resize an image, you can just use the corners once this image is selected and size it up or down. This is going to allow you, though, to change the frame of it, and it might end up with some weird things. If you want to keep the aspect ratio, you're going to hold down Shift. So if you hold down Shift while you're scaling, it's going to keep it exactly the same aspect ratio. And then you're not going to morph the photo while you're doing that. Let's see. What if a user wants to choose a different combination of workout options? If they want to choose yoga for 30 minutes, for example. Yes. So unfortunately, you are going to have to sort of limit, or you are going to have to somewhat limit all of the options that you give a user. So a really great way to solve for customizing all the different options from something like this dropdown is actually using components. I don't have a ton of time to get into that right now, but when you create components and those components have prototype connections, they actually also copy over those prototype connections. So if we had a component for every single option and connected each option to an input preference, it would sort of copy that prototype connection as well. That's a little bit complicated though. I think that probably your best bet would be to kind of maybe narrow it down to like 9 options total. And then connecting each of those options together, each of those combinations is a little bit of work, but it's definitely less work than having to do that for every single open overlay as well. Okay, extra clarity on making a component. So we'll go back to the adding UI components page, because here I have a lot of elements. So to create a component, you're just going to select the element that you want to be in a component. So in this case, the button. And you can either right click on the element itself or hit control on the element itself, or you can do that in the left nav where that element is. And then you just choose create component. And so now you'll see it's a component. It has a sort of purple outline. It has this box around it. And you can verify that by copying and pasting. So you create an instance of that component, and then on the master component, if you make updates, you'll see the changes in the child component. Okay, cool. I hope, let's see, are there any others? Cool. Okay. Okay, I think those are all the questions that were in the chat. And I know you guys have other sessions you might be getting. Oh, can you change? Yes, can you change the text in the instance from a component? It's a really good question. So if you copy a component with text, if you make updates to the master component, it will update the child component if that component hasn't altered its own text yet. So if I say button, you are going to see that again. However, I can change the child component text without affecting the master component. So each text element within a child component can be kind of manipulated, which is really great for things like buttons, where you want the styling to be the same, but you might want the text to be different. So even though we changed the text, the styling of the button is still going to copy over as well. And I think if we then change, like, yeah, so once you make a change to the child component's text, if you then update the master component text, it's not going to update the child component text anymore. Okay. Oh, a previous question. What does it mean to have need a high fidelity screen? Oh, this is a really good question, and I'm sorry that I didn't give you more clarity when I initially kind of designed it. So what I mean by high fidelity is something that looks and feels like exactly what you think the experience is going to look like if it were coded or if it were like in the app. So high fidelity is like, I am handing this off to a developer, or I am showing this to a client, and this is like almost exactly what it's going to look like in the actual app. Anything lower fidelity than that, so probably like a step down from that would be like, we know that everything is going to kind of be laid out in this way on the page, but like maybe the colors aren't there, or maybe like some of the images aren't chosen yet, or maybe we haven't like landed on a logo yet. That's just kind of a step down from that. And if you probably today, like you're probably not going to be having things that are like super high fidelity and that you're like are like production ready. But it's just kind of figuring out what fidelity you want to test with. And a really good question you can ask yourself is like, do I want users to be responding to the role that this prototype is going to play in their life? So like, do I care how they view this experience and what they think they might get out of the content of this experience? Or do I want them to respond to like the look and feel? Like, how does it feel to open this application? What is like the context around it? If the look and feel part of it is really important, then you might want to have a higher fidelity. But if not, you're probably going to go for something that's lower fidelity. Yes, the kits that include buttons, headers, etc. So one, you can Google Figma UI kits, and you'll probably find stuff. I included one called this Material UI Theming Kit. I'll post it in the chat so that everyone can get access to it. I would also just do, I didn't have a ton of time, I had just Googled this before, and I have used this one before. But if you Google, I would imagine that like Microsoft probably has UI kits you can use. Facebook might even, like a lot of companies do publish UI kits for their design libraries. So you might just do some quick searching on that as well. Okay. I will hang out for like another 10-ish minutes for anyone who has like additional questions. Feel free to use your video and say them, or just to post them in the chat. But I really thank you guys all for coming today. I hope you got something out of this. I know that you're probably doing a lot right now trying to figure out your projects and stuff. So if there's any way I can be helpful, please just let me know.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Megan. You're amazing. Just for the other people, for the talk, it's currently being recorded and it will be posted on YouTube after the talk finishes, probably next hour or so. So yeah, stay tuned for that. It'll be at Hack Duke. Just search that up.
I will go ahead and